All right, guys, welcome to another episode of Hanging Out with Hamza. Today I have a very special guest on. His name is Christiaan. He's a close friend of mine that I met through Figs. And in this episode, we will be focusing on Christiaan's diabetic journey and his ability to not only educate us about it, but, give us a better perspective on life with diabetes and how he's able to overcome it. So thanks for listening, and this is Hanging Out with Hamza. Hey y'all, this is Hamza, and I'm super happy we get to hang out for a little bit. Alright guys, welcome to a special episode of Hanging Out with Hamza. As you can see, we're cozied up here in my hotel room. We're going to be kind of covering a lot of things, but I want to first start off by introducing my guest. His name is Christiaan. Like I said, we met through Figs, and we just kind of clicked immediately. We had a lot of shared passions over music, movies, pop culture, and he's just a big, giant teddy bear to me. And he's also educated me a lot about diabetes and his life with it, and just given me a lot of, great information about it that I would have never known about if it wasn't for him. And I think his ability to share that with his followers and educate his audience in such a not only fun way, but also just kind of give us more of a better understanding of the struggle of having diabetes, especially in America, has been really interesting. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Christiaan so he can introduce himself.
Well, first of all, thank you for reaching out and letting me know that you were going to be here. I'm glad we can make this work.
Of course.
My name is Christiaan. I am a nurse of a little over 9 years, and I have had diabetes for 7, I was 9, something like that. So type 1 diabetic, insulin dependent. Yeah. Try to do my best to educate people, because I realize now that there is a lot of healthcare workers don't understand about it. And it took getting the disease to realize just how awful of a disease process it is and managing it and how much it consumes of you. And so, unfortunately, it took actually living that life to understand. And I think a lot of healthcare workers aren't aware of just what goes on in the background with diabetes. We see a lot of patients with diabetes, and we can tend to write it off as people who are, I hate the word, but non-compliant. But because there's so much more that goes into it than just counting your carbs and taking your insulin. I think trying to use my platform to help raise that awareness is kind of, it's where living with the diagnosis has led me.
So just for listeners, I wanted to kind of help start off with differentiating type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So if you want to just break down in layman's terms what the difference is between the two.
Yeah, so with, there's certainly people who are far better at explaining this than I am, but in a nutshell, type 2, you still make insulin. You just are more resistant to the insulin that you're making. Whether that be genetics, lifestyle, there's a lot of stigma around diabetes, and it's always associated with type 2. People think that type 2 is the one that you do to yourself, which is not necessarily the case. Yeah, lifestyle modification has a lot to do with it, but it's also super highly connected to genetics and your family history. So there's a lot more that goes into it than just like, I did this to myself type thing. And then type 1 is when your autoimmune system just decides to attack your pancreas, specifically the beta cells in the pancreas, which are responsible for creating insulin, and there's like 6 other hormones that it's responsible for that we lose out on, like amylin, which lets you know when you're full, a lot of that stuff. So you just don't make that anymore. And I have what would be considered type 1.5, so latent autoimmune diabetes of adulthood. So I was 26 going into my 27th year of life when I was diagnosed.
And when you were diagnosed, do you feel like obviously your lifestyle changed quite significantly, but do you feel like it changed for the better or for the worse in terms of just health?
It's a great question. So I've been a big guy my entire life. I was like 335 pounds in high school. before nursing school, I dropped a ton of weight. I dropped 110 pounds. You would look at me and say that I was healthier at that point. But I don't necessarily think I was, because
I remember you spoke about this.
My wife would say that I had an eating disorder. I would call it like a borderline eating disorder, but you
just took it to the next level.
Yeah, which I think is the case with a lot of people with fitness.
Yeah.
Because of body dysmorphia, you tend to get to kind of a weird place. So for me, it was being very calorie restrictive to a point of detriment. And then also, I was doing insanity like 2 times a day. I was doing a lot of unsustainable practices to try to get to a point where I thought I'd be happy. And I never, I had a little V-cut and 6-pack abs at the time, and I still never saw that in the mirror and thought that that was good enough. And so then nursing school happened, and I kind of put weight back on. Life gets in the way of a lot of things, and I was working 2 ICU jobs at the time, night shifts for those, one in like a cardiac ICU and one in a trauma burn ICU. And I was doing like 70 hours a week between the 2 ICUs, and really was not sleeping or eating healthy, just not taking care of myself. And when I was first diagnosed, we had just got back from Disney, and I got a sinus infection while we were there, because there's grimy kids everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I chalked it up to that, like, I was really thirsty, and I was like, well, I'm mouth breathing all the time. That's why. And then we started to get kind of into the late fall, winter months, and I was like, well, the heat's on. That's why the house is dry. That's why my mouth is dry. That's why I'm thirsty all the time. So even as a nurse, armed with the knowledge that I had on diabetes, what was right in front of me, I was so oblivious to. And, I started having vision problems where I was like, well, my vision's blurry because I just worked 70 hours straight between 2 ICUs with 3 hours of sleep each night. Like, obviously my eyes are tired. So all these things that were right in front of me, and I just kept chalking up to something else. And then finally one night I was like 5 hours into my shift at work and had drank like 7 liters of water, couldn't stop peeing. My vision was super blurry. I couldn't see the vitals on the monitor 10 feet in front of me.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, what is going on? And legitimately, I was like running through it in my head while I was doing my patient assessment, and my patient was sitting in front of me, and it clicked. And without even thinking out loud, I was like, oh shit, I think I have diabetes.
Wow.
And my patient looked at me like, what? I was like, hey, sorry, the personal thing going on.
Yeah.
Excused myself from the room, told my charge nurse, and went to the emergency room. And sure enough, my sugar was in like the 600s. And so that was the night that I was diagnosed as a diabetic, but we didn't know it was this latent autoimmune until months later. It was a lot of trial and error. So starting a medication, making lifestyle modifications, I'd get the blood sugar down. It would kind of plateau and start climbing again. So then we'd add a new medication. It would plateau, start getting worse again. And it was actually the first big shoot that I did where I was sitting and talking to Dr. Mauricio about it, and just like super frustrated. And he was like, you should talk to your primary about running such and such labs, a C-peptide and a GAD antibody, which the C-peptide is a byproduct of insulin when it's made. It cleaves, it's like a connecting peptide that holds the 2 insulin chains together. I don't know how in depth we want to go here, but that's how you can see how much insulin you're making by checking that. And then the GAD antibody is the like pancreas specific antibody. So we drew those, and the C-peptide was low, the GAD antibody was high, and sure enough, within like a few months of that, I was not making insulin at all anymore.
Wow.
And was fully insulin dependent.
Yeah, I mean, that could definitely be helpful for people who, like your case, just didn't know they had something like this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how common is it for patients to not even know that they have it until they're in an emergency situation like this? Whatever.
I would say it's pretty common. A lot of people,
just the lack of education,
and just, we all have very busy lives.
Yeah. Especially as Americans.
Yeah. There's a lot that we tend to ignore with our own health until it's too late. And so I think there's a lot that people can just, again, chalk up to something else, or just kind of set off to the side as we have to focus on, some people working 1, 2, 3 jobs,
Yeah.
trying to make ends meet. So it's very easy to put stuff off. Are we allowed to swear?
Yeah.
To put shit off and just shove stuff to the side and be like, oh, I'll circle back to that when I get the time. And
Yeah. So obviously this podcast is usually about passions and about talking about things that we're, the guest is not only passionate about, but very educated on because of that passion. So originally Christian and I were kind of discussing like what we could talk about. There are a lot of things that he is very passionate about, but he was kind of nervous about what to talk about specifically because he didn't know if he knew enough about it. So,
well, yeah, I feel like a lot of your guests have passions that they're very focused on, and I'm very much, every aspect of my life, I've always been a jack of all trades, master of none. So, I play a lot of different instruments. I started with drums when I was little, moved on to guitar, then bass, piano, mandolin, banjo, but it's not something I excel at with any of them. And same with just a lot of different aspects in life. But I do think one thing that has come from that is I've been able to use the little bit of talent I have in each area to create a platform where I can educate. Before nursing, I had focused on media production, audiovisual production. Well, I'm now able to use my knowledge from that to create an ability to educate on nursing and diabetes and what it's like to be a nurse when you have a chronic illness. So many of us spend all of our energy taking care of others. So what's life look like when you now have to dedicate that energy to yourself in order to be able to take care of others?
Yeah. And I think, that's what I was basically getting at, is that you were able to implement all of these different passions into something that not only educates us, about the diabetics aspect of it, but also do it in an entertaining way, as weird as that sounds. But it's a very tough subject to swallow, and you somehow make it digestible for us. So that's always, something that I appreciate, and I'm sure a lot of your followers do as well. And you managed to kind of break the stigma around it too, because I feel like it's something that not a lot of people talk about for some reason. And you managed to kind of remove that seal to make it, a conversation that we can all be aware of. And one of the things I wanted to bring up was obviously attaining insulin in America as an American citizen and the challenges you face as an American citizen. And if you can kind of enlighten the audience about that.
Yeah, I feel like so much goes into managing diabetes that isn't discussed, or people just don't have the knowledge on. Before I was diagnosed with it, I would get patients that would come in that were type 1, and they'd come in to the hospital with DKA, which is a condition called diabetic ketoacidosis, which is when you don't have enough insulin in your system and your sugar gets too high, and it's just like a feed-forward mechanism that you get more dehydrated, the sugar gets higher, and it just spirals. We'd get these patients under control, and I'd get them to the point where we would discharge them, and I'd be like, all right, now, just remember, when you get out of here, watch what you eat, take your insulin, exercise, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure every single one of them thought, okay, asshole, it's not that simple. And now that I live that life, I realize it's not that simple. Insulin aside, there's so many things. You could do the same thing 2 days in a row and have completely different results based on the amount of sleep you got, the temperature outside, if your stress level, if you're a female, your hormones, if you are about to menstruate, the difference in hormones, how that messes with your blood sugar. There's just so many aspects. And then you consider just the cost of managing the condition and how for some people insulin is unattainable. There's a lot that goes into it. And then, you start to talk about that and the cost of insulin, and there's inevitably someone who's like, well, Walmart sells cheap insulin. It's like, yeah, insulin's not a one size fits all thing. There's different variations of it that a lot of people have to go through some trial and error with different brands, different styles, whether they are on a pump or have to use long-acting and short-acting. There's a lot of different things that go into it. It's great that there's a cheap alternative. We could discuss what cheap is compared to the cost of manufacturing it versus what they try to sell it for by... there's a lot that goes into it, that it's not a one-size-fits-all diagnosis.
So in your perspective based on you being in not only the healthcare industry, but being a person with diabetes, what do you think the best solution would be for this? Obviously, the most ideal solution is to make it affordable for all and make it free for all.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a big proponent for insulin for all. There's an organization called T1 International that really is trying to push for that, where just equal access to insulin for everybody. In an ideal world, that would be free insulin for everybody. You're going to get a lot of pushback from that because the manufacturers just make too much money off of it. Right now, one vial of my insulin, which I tend to go through 2 to 3 a month, depending on how things are going. One vial of the insulin I use without insurance is, the last time I had looked, like pre-pandemic, it was $312 a vial. I know it's absolutely gone up from there.
Wow.
Just with inflation, and it costs pennies to make each vial, and the upcharge on it is insane.
And then on top of that, there's obviously, do you want to go into like what you're currently wearing and how that works, just to kind of educate?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's different ways that people manage it. Again, because it's not a one size fits all thing. Some people can only afford a glucometer and have to poke their finger multiple times a day to check their blood sugar. And then they're using, so your pancreas, in a normal physiologic state, your pancreas would make kind of a baseline level of insulin that we would call a basal rate. It kind of keeps you level throughout the day. And then when you eat a meal, it responds to that and releases what would be the equivalent of a bolus dose. And then you've also got other factors, with your liver creating gluconeogenesis and creating sugar to kind of balance. So it's this whole system, right? If you're not on a pump, you have to take a long-acting insulin as your basal that gets you through the day, and then some people with their meals have to then take a bolus dose with each meal. So you're counting the carbs that you're eating and adjusting accordingly. And then on the pump, you just have you use just one type of insulin, and that slowly administers some as a basal rate throughout the day, and then you program your bolus with each meal, or a correction if your blood sugar is running high from there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
in the short of it.
Yeah, it's incredible how you basically have to calculate your meals throughout the day and keep track of that.
Again, just to try to help break the stigma and help bring an understanding to just how much of a mental burden it is. Depending on where I'm at, so I'm in grad school. So if have a day where I'm sitting and just studying all day, my basal rate and my bolus rate are going to be higher because I'm not as active. Whereas if I'm at work and I'm running around the unit, I have to have a different basal rate and a different insulin to carb ratio there, because I'm going to be using those carbs differently. Depending on the meal, if I'm eating something that has carbs in it but has also got a decent amount of fats and proteins, I have to change exactly how I'm giving myself the insulin, because that could impact how the carbs are absorbed, because the fats are going to kind of slow down the breakdown of those carbs and kind of spread it out over time. So if I take everything up front, like say I'm having pizza, if I take all the insulin I should take for the amount of carbs in that pizza up front, I'm going to bottom out, because the carbs from the crust are going to be absorbed slower because of the fats in the cheese. So it's a mental game always, and you're constantly kind of trying to figure out, how am I not going to kill myself today when I'm doing these adjustments and these boluses? And
yeah, we talked about it earlier too. You and a girl I talked to recently, or a while ago, had diabetes, and I didn't realize fully just how involved you are in your own personal monitoring of your health until I was obviously speaking to you about it. And even with her, I remember she would check with me like, hey, like, do you have any sugar at your place, or do you have this or that? And it's like, you have to kind of plan every step ahead as well, which we take for granted just as, people who don't have diabetes. I don't even have to worry about, like, if I'm going to go to a hotel room or if I'm going to go visit someone, like, I don't have to pre-plan ahead if there's going to be anything available. So I think that's another thing. You remove that stigma of hopefully people not feeling embarrassed to ask that stuff or check in with people like that, because it is an important thing to check in. I think there are probably people out there who are embarrassed to bring this stuff up and just carry all the sugar with them and whatnot. But
And that's the other thing is the stigma associated with it. Anytime, because as a type 1, I do have to have sweets with me to be able to correct low blood sugars, because otherwise that is a life-threatening situation.
yeah,
Then you always get people like, well, are you allowed to eat that? Are you diabetic? You can have that? Like, yeah, I can have whatever I want. I just have to make the right corrections.
yeah,
That's the other thing that I try to push is there's no such thing as bad food. It's just everything in moderation, right? Like, I know that's going to probably get a lot of flack, because there certainly are things that are processed and not great for you.
yeah.
But if that's what you have access to,
Yeah,
then we have to learn. Yeah, then we have to learn to work within your means, right? So if you're a patient that, if you're in a food desert and you only have access to processed things, then we got to figure out how do we balance that with other things.
Yeah,
Whether that's insulin or trying to find proper ways to exercise, get your cardio in. It just, everything is so specific to the person and their lived situation. Again, it's not a one size fits all thing.
yeah. In terms of, I guess, our relationship, and just to dive deeper into how we met and whatnot, what do you feel like was the most important thing that, this is obviously stepping a little bit away from the passion right now, but just to kind of understand deeper for the audience, like how we got to know each other and what you feel like made our friendship special compared to, I guess, the run.
So, did we start interacting post-pan? Like, it was 2020, right? Or did we start talking in 2019 before that?
I think it was 2020, because I think that was around the time we were just, DMing more often, and we kind of caught on that we were both into the same pop culture things. And
I always really appreciated your eye for, anyone who follows you sees the photos you take and your ability to see art in anything. And so I always really appreciated that. And I appreciated your creativity when it came to your posts. And just kind of how vulnerable and real you are as a human. And so that's, I feel like that's kind of how we connected. And especially in the world of influencers, I hate to use that term because I don't feel like an influencer, even though we have platforms. Like, it's just not something I necessarily align with, because I feel like it's such a fake world. Everything's so manufactured. And so just seeing someone talk about their real mental health struggles or their real passions for different music or art, it was just refreshing. Because that's something I've always tried to achieve for myself. So
appreciate it, man. That's honestly why to be fully transparent, I remember you were one of the first few people through Figs that I was like following, and I always was like, damn, this guy's hilarious. And I just like, again, in the world of that influencer stuff, I did think that, you had a lot of followers and whatnot, but you were genuinely sharing stuff that was truly you. Like, I felt like the person I met eventually and the person I was following were aligned. And that's always my biggest fear, especially going to these like events where, you meet all these influencers. There's this big fear of like, is the person that I kind of like built in my head aligned with this person that I'm about to meet? And unfortunately, a majority of the time, I got to say it's not exactly what I was hoping for. And it is always a little bit disappointing. But for those moments when it does align, it's just like such a great feeling. And then on top of that, having our friendship align with each other, because sometimes that doesn't happen either. Yeah. But we were able to instantly connect and maintain a good connection. And we spoke about this earlier. I think my biggest lesson this year has been to give less of myself away and to protect a lot of myself. I think a big part of me is I really love friendships and relationships, and I really love being involved in them. And I think sometimes we grow in this world and realize that you can sometimes be in an imperfect balance of a relationship where you might be giving too much of yourself and not getting the same in return. And I've had to slowly cut off a lot of those relationships for my betterment, not because I had anything against them or because there's anything personal, but more just to protect my energy and just like, save that energy for people that also share it, and it's not that it's a transactional thing, but it's more just an equilibrium. Just like you talked about with the diabetes stuff, I feel like there's this constant equilibrium that you have to like monitor and keep track of. And so I mentioned with our friendship, it's never felt like that. And I've always appreciated that. So,
well, and it's nice that you understand that because like we were talking about, I feel like I haven't been able to be present as a friend for a lot of people just between being in grad school, being a dad, working full time. Like we were talking about these next 3 months, I'm going to be basically on a schedule where I'm working 7 days a week between clinical and my actual job, the one that pays. And it's just going to be, I'm dreading it because I'm just not going to have the time to dedicate. I'm worried about even what I will be able to dedicate towards my own family, to my wife and my daughter. And it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, listeners, if you aren't aware or haven't followed Christiaan yet, not only is he like, a nurse in grad school that is educating the public through his platform about diabetes and mental health and everything, but he also has a daughter named Junie who's super cute and a wife. And so I can only imagine how hard it is to juggle all that stuff. But yeah, as a friend, you don't have to worry about that. That's one of the things I also understand with a lot of my friendships is there's a balance between understanding when a person can't be there for you for personal reasons versus selfish reasons, right? And in this case, while it can be considered selfish, it's a good kind of selfish. Like I think you have to save that energy for you and your family, and I've never taken that personally. So just to make sure you understand that, hopefully your other friends, your good friends will really always understand that. So
I think it's just part of growing up is realizing where you need to direct your time and your energy. Especially, I mean, I know not everyone wants to have kids, but having a kid really helped me figure that out. Also helps you realize all the things that you need to work on yourself.
Yeah.
So that you don't project those things onto your child.
Yeah.
Every single day is a learning experiment. I don't want to say that I was raised poorly because I wasn't. My parents are awesome. But there's things that they did when I was a kid that I find myself, if like Juniper's acting up or something, that my first thought is to respond in the way my parents would have. And I have to take a moment to take a breath and take a step back and try to respond in a way that will be more conducive to Juniper being able to, I don't know,
grow up in a healthier mindset. And,
I've and not even just the parenting thing, just, the body image thing. I've always struggled with how I look. If I made the fat joke about myself first, then it took away the burn of someone else being able to make it. It took away the power from people. So I always was the self-deprecating humor, take my skinny friend's jacket, put that on, fat guy in a little coat, all those like the stupid little jokes that I would make about myself as a way to mask how I truly felt and kind of take the power back. And that creeps into your daily life. When you look in the mirror, you find yourself making comments. And so I've really had to try to hone in on that because that's something that I never want my daughter to feel about herself. So it starts with me learning how to control what I say and control what I feel and
your verbiage.
My verbiage and not vocalizing my insecurities because I never want her to hear that and think that it's okay to talk about herself that way.
Yeah. I actually had the same conversation with a friend recently, and he kept saying self-deprecating stuff, and it's gotten to the point where I didn't really, I knew it was coming from the same place as you, where it's, when people make a joke so many times, it starts to become a reality.
Mm-hmm.
So it was one of those things where I straight up just called them out, and I was like, listen, if you keep saying that, I'm going to call you out on it and nip it in the bud because it's not healthy and it's not like a good approach to have about yourself. Like you should speak about yourself in a much more positive tone.
Yeah.
And I guess this goes for like anybody. If you have a friend who's constantly putting themselves down for the sake of everyone else to feel better or more comfortable, just cut them off if you can. And not in a bad way, but just kind of like let them know that you don't agree with that perspective.
Yeah, cut them off in the way of stop talking about yourself that way. Not cut them off like,
exactly.
Get out of my life.
Yeah, just make sure they're aware that they don't have to say stuff like that to make you feel comfortable. And if anything, it's probably not making most of your friends feel comfortable. And so, yeah, I'm glad that you're doing it with your daughter, because it's definitely something from a young age that they can pick up on.
And it's something that I thought I had been better about until the Instagram platform started to grow and I became more involved in these spaces with other influencers, content creators, and, attending events where most likely I'm going to be the biggest person there. And it just really, it brings back like middle school feelings almost of just the insecurities. It's wild. So that's something, that I've been trying to work on with myself.
Yeah, I think you've been doing great. And if you kind of think about it in another light, there's so many people that look up to you and admire you for what you're sharing and doing on a platform. And I don't think your weight or your appearance or anything is something that really crosses their mind in that regard. And if anything, I mean, you are kind of promoting a better sense of being comfortable in who you are. And, like it's not like you're unhealthy. Like you're taking care of yourself. You're doing the necessary things to take care of yourself.
If you look at my labs and all of that stuff, I am the healthiest I have been in a long time, compared to back when I had dropped a ton of weight. I was not in a good spot because I was not nourished the way I should be. And now, learning how to control this disease has helped me really be able to hone in on my health, both physical and mental, because it really is such a mental toll. You kind of do live with this back of your head fear of, what if I do something wrong? Or what if I'm somewhere and I don't have the things I need to get my blood sugar back up? What if I'm alone? I love to go out on jogs with my daughter and have her in the jogger. What if I'm out miles away from home and because of the cardio activity, my blood sugar just tanks and I collapse with my daughter not able to do, she's 4. What is she going to do?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that really just kind of you have to focus on mentally. And yeah, it's a 24/7 disease process.
I guess this goes into my next subject about it's kind of wavers between the weight loss and diabetes and the current system that we're dealing with in America, Ozempic.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of dive into like that whole thing? Because I think there's a lot of people that don't have a lot of education about Ozempic and where it actually stems from.
Yeah. So that medication and that whole class of medications, the SG or the GLP-1s.
Yeah, of course, GLP-1s.
Yeah.
All about that.
You got your GLP-1s, your SGLT2s. So no, the Ozempic is that form of that classification, the GLP-1. And so there's a few different variations of it. But ultimately, what they do is it was started as a medication for type 2 diabetes. And it slows your gastric motility so you feel fuller longer. It also slows it so that you don't have these huge spikes of blood sugar after meals because you're not absorbing those carbs as fast. It works in a number of different ways. So that's how it is beneficial for weight loss. As a type 1 diabetic, you can't qualify for it. Like insurance won't cover it. I was able to get it for a year, just for weight, under the guise of weight loss, but it was more beneficial to me as a type 1 diabetic because we don't make certain hormones like amylin, which helps you feel full. It gives you the sensation that you're full to stop eating. And so it can kind of help with that. It slows that gastric motility so you don't have the huge spikes of blood sugar. But unfortunately, the FDA doesn't see the benefit in it for us. So yeah, it's frustrating to me to see people use it for like vanity weight loss when I know so many people who truly need it can't afford it, can't get the coverage. But I mean, I feel like that's the way with a lot of things in this country is we live in a pay to play system. And
so how do people without diabetes have access to it while diabetes type 1 people don't?
So there are, med spas that compound their own. They get basically a bulk version of it and then kind of dilute it or, compound it in their own fashion. Or there's people who can get it through different weight loss programs or something, but they're paying a good amount of money for it.
So there's cocktails out there that just mix it, and then basically they're getting it from like a third-party resource.
It can be, yeah. Or, the different weight loss med spas, anything like that. Generally you can get it for weight loss, prescribed for weight loss, and get it covered by insurance if you are someone who is struggling with weight loss in traditional forms. I'm talking more of the people who want, you look at the celebrities that get it, the people who have money who can just scoop it up and get it.
Are there currently any health complications that you see or could foresee happening with people that are on it right now that don't need it?
I don't know about, every medication has its own side effects and adverse effects and risks. I personally, as someone who's been on it and understand, like it really messes with your stomach. You get nauseous very easily, throw up very easily. I couldn't understand why anyone would want to take it just to shed a few pounds, because it's not a great feeling. But it's for those who do need it, who need it for their blood sugar, it's a wonderful medication. Yeah.
So since we're going to go ahead and wrap up, I just wanted to kind of, give our listeners just like one last kind of tidbit about the stigma behind diabetes and how you feel like they can educate themselves more about the subject. And, if there's anything that you feel is misunderstood about the world of diabetes and what can be kind of corrected in that manner.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I have is there's a very big lack of education surrounding what diabetes truly is and what living with it is like. It is not a quote-unquote fat person disease. It is not something that you necessarily do to yourself. There's just so many things that go into it. And there's a lot of good resources that you can listen to and follow, like Dr. Mike Natter, who's also a FIGS ambassador. He's a physician with type 1 diabetes. He has great talks on it, also incorporates art into it and really makes things easily digestible and easy to understand, because it is such a complex disease process. But just, there's so much stigma that goes around it, and just trying to do what we can to break that. Because diabetes, there's no look of what diabetes is. Like a person who's diabetic doesn't look a certain way. It impacts a whole range of people. And so just trying to break the stigma around that and helping people understand, especially helping healthcare workers understand just the level of mental health burden that goes into it. When you're making hundreds of decisions a day regarding managing your blood sugar, why you might have that patient come in DKA where they say like, I just stopped taking my insulin for a while. Because I've gotten to that point where you just are so burnt out on making decisions where you're just like, I just want to fucking live like a normal person. I want to eat something without thinking, how is this going to impact me? I want to go do this without thinking, what am I going to have to bring with? I want to live a spontaneous life instead of having this constant planning going on. And so I am much more understanding now when I get people who come in with diabetes related conditions, when they're just like, I got tired of it. But also even beyond that, the excessive, we had kind of started to talk about it with like the cost of insulin and just the accessibility to things, beyond the cost. Maybe you can afford it because of, whatever health insurance you plan, but maybe you don't have consistent housing and you're not able to keep your insulin refrigerated. Maybe you don't have access to the adequate food or, all these different things that you need to be able to keep the disease in check. So it's, I don't know, if I could just bring awareness to all that and help provide a fuller picture to people, I'm hoping that's doing something to reduce the stigma around it.
Well, thanks for sharing all that, man. It definitely, it gave me a greater sense of empathy for not only the struggles that you guys deal with, but also just like allows me to better understand how to approach a person with diabetes, not only as a healthcare provider, but as a friend and a family member or whatnot. So I genuinely appreciate it. Keep sharing what you're sharing. And for anyone listening, I will go ahead and leave Christian's information on the bio. And if you guys want to go ahead and follow him, Christian, do you want to share all your socials for them?
Yeah, it's RedbeardRN across all platforms.
OnlyFans?
Not yet, but if insulin keeps getting more expensive, it might be.
Well, it's called diabetes or diabetes.
Yeah.
Anyways, thanks for listening to Hanging Out with Hamza, guys. Again, if you guys need any more information on this stuff, feel free to follow his socials.
Yeah.
He's really great at not only sharing this stuff, but making it, fun in a way to understand.
I haven't been putting out as much content as I'd like to, just because of school and life.
Being a daddy and stuff.
Being a dad. Did you say that? Being a daddy?
Yeah.
Sure.
And being a dad, I guess.
Being both.
Yeah.
So yeah, once school is done, I graduate in December. I will hopefully have the time again to start making more educational content.
Yeah. Cool. Well, again, thanks for listening, guys. And this is Hanging Out with Hamza. Take care.
Buddy.
Bye.